So another thing, and maybe we'll disagree a bit more on this, is I'm actually not necessarily convinced that cryptocurrency is currency. I mean, it's obviously the term that people call it, and so I use it. But I don't think that Bitcoin is not a currency. It's not a unit of account. It's not a medium of exchange. Like I can't go to the grocery store and hand them Bitcoin for groceries. I can't go to the movie theater and pay Bitcoin to go watch a movie. Amazon will not accept my Bitcoin for selling me, whatever it is that Amazon sells us everything. So it's more of a niche thing. And now I do, however, think it is a store of value. But it's not yet at the level of a currency. Now, like gold, for example, isn't a currency either. None of those places I just told you about will accept my gold bullion, right? So if I bring a bar of gold to the grocery store or whatever, then they're not going to accept that. But yeah, I mean, so I think that thinking of these things as so they're just not yet currencies. That doesn't mean that they won't ever be. And maybe part of part of the sort of the insurance you're getting when you buy Bitcoin is that you're kind of protecting yourself against the scenario where somehow the U.S. dollar becomes worthless or something, like there's some major either policy screw ups or like a nuclear war or something. And in that scenario, maybe cryptocurrencies actually start becoming like a unit of account because like society is sort of broken down or something. But I don't know, just today, I don't see it.
So I have two things that kind of jump to mind. The first is I'm going to throw out a definition of a currency and you tell me if this is aligned with yours. I heard you say a couple things. So I'm assuming it's like store of value, medium of exchange, and unit of account would be the three things, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so I would agree with that, and I think that's like a good framework. And my guess is that most people who are quote unquote currency experts would say, hey, yes, that checks the boxes of that. Now, where I may question some of those currency experts is a lot of times when I hear people talk about is something a currency or is it not, obviously given what I do on a day-to-day basis, a lot of time they're talking about Bitcoin, but there are other assets that you mentioned gold and others that can kind of come under this scrutiny. One of the things that I've started to think about more, and I frankly don't have a fully formed opinion, so I'll kind of throw it out there as maybe a prompt and you can respond to it, is that actually some assets are currencies in one situation, but not currencies in another. And what it made me think about is like environment matters when evaluating if something's a currency or not. And where this came from was I used to use the example of cigarettes inside of a prison. Yeah. And so like, again, kind of extreme example, right? But it highlights the point of like, they're used as a store of value, they're used as a medium of exchange, and to some degree, they're used as like a unit of account, right? It's more of like a barter type system and they're used. Now, I don't think anyone who wants to be taken seriously in the financial world or in the academic world would go and say, cigarettes are a currency all around the world. And if you got cigarettes, you're good to go. But in that, kind of more insular environment, they do act as a currency. And so if you take that and kind of extrapolate it out to Bitcoin, it's unique in that I think most people who hold Bitcoin and even people who don't, but kind of evaluate it, they would agree, yes, Bitcoin serves as a store of value. Now, whether it's a good one or bad one, that's debated. Free market kind of determines price and it changes and fluctuates. But store of value, I think most people are like, okay, I can see that. When it comes to the medium of exchange and the unit of account, that's where I think, you're highlighting, hey, look, this is not widespread. This is not global. And so if you use that, like, well, what environment are you talking about? In a physical environment, if you go to, Bitcoin Beach, there's a lot of people who are using it for transactions. Things are priced in Bitcoin, but I don't know, maybe there's a couple hundred, maybe, single digit thousands of people in that one insular economy that are using it. Again, does that make it a currency on a global scale? Does that mean that it's just within that insular economy? Is that the first data point on a, upward trajectory of adoption globally? All up for debate, but at least in that insular thing, it's being used as a currency. But I would agree with you on a global basis, it is not unit of account. There has not been, this hyper Bitcoinization idea, all of those types of things. And so like, the prompt that I would almost kind of want to hear your thoughts on is like, how do folks who look at these currencies think about, global evaluation versus more of like these insular economies? And can something almost serve, to some people as a currency, and to other people, it's actually not a currency? Like they actively are on the other side of that debate. How does that work?
Yeah, that actually is an interesting question because, for example, the things that I just described, like going to the grocery store or the movie theater or whatever, if I'm doing that in the United States and I brought a euro banknote to the grocery store or the movie theater, they wouldn't take that either. So in that setting, it's not the euro banknote is not acting as a currency, even though, of course, we would generally recognize the euro to be a currency, and certainly anywhere in the European Union and many countries besides that, it would be accepted for those kinds of transactions. So, yeah, I mean, I guess so that there is inherently a sort of like a time, place, and manner type notion to the concept of a currency, but still, I think that it's got to be a lot more widespread than Bitcoin currently is.
Yeah. And I think to your point, it's like, one of the things I've always said is like, if Bitcoin becomes a store of value, it does not necessarily achieve what is written in the white paper, right? Electronic peer-to-peer cash. Like it's very much intended to be both a store of value, medium of exchange, and then eventually that would lead to the unit of account. But at the same time, if it became the global store of value that was used by billions of people, like that would be a pretty big success. Right. So just that alone would kind of, I think a lot of people would point to and say, hey, Bitcoin worked for that specific use case. Now, obviously, people in the Bitcoin community believe that it is going to become the medium of exchange and that unit of account. And so the other thing I always laugh about, it was kind of like with the inflation talk in the United States. They're like, it's transitory, it's not transitory. I used to always say like, well, what makes where's the line, right? If it's only here for 6 months, is that transitory? But if it's here for 7, then it wasn't transitory. It's kind of like this like very arbitrary, loose definition that's used. And so the same thing with like medium of exchange, right? Is I almost think about like, if 100 million people used it for everyday transactions, is that enough? Well, there's like, 7.5, 8 billion people, whatever it is in the world. Like, we're not even really at like, 10%. Does it have to be a billion? Like where's the line? And a friend of mine said to me, he goes, nah, it's more of like a, it when you see it thing. And I think that's kind of how people feel a little bit is like, okay, I feel like it's a store of value for enough people where like, I'll buy that. I don't know enough people who use it on a day-to-day basis. So like, I kind of don't believe that story yet. And then when I go to the store, I don't see it priced in Bitcoin. So like, I don't believe the unit of account. But I don't know, maybe like there are definitions of this stuff that like, the Bitcoin community just hasn't talked about yet. It's like a very fascinating thing that in some way the Bitcoin community and myself personally, like we've gotten a crash course in economics, the banking system, like currencies, like all this stuff. And I always wonder like how much of it is we're learning versus like we're trying to recreate the wheel. And like we maybe should just like learn from history a little bit at the same time.
Yeah. No, I mean, I certainly don't know off the top of my head of any kind of like specific definition as far as, let's say, how many people have to use something in order for it to be considered a currency. I guess I just go back to beauty's in the eye of the beholder, right?
Yes.
So, on the other hand, the one thing I do want to respond to in that you just had mentioned is like talking about millions of people using it. My paper actually kind of gets really is thinking more like, like 100 institutions or something, right? Like, or maybe no more than 150 or something. And so like, in terms of Bitcoin becoming used as a unit of account or medium of exchange, I think actually those are quite separable from being a store of value, and the store of value doesn't necessarily imply the other two at all. I mean, again, go back to the example of gold. I mean, people have been using gold as a store of value for thousands of years, but it's been quite some time since it's been thought of as a unit of account or a medium of exchange. So, yeah.
Yeah, I completely agree. And again, it goes back to this idea of like Bitcoin layer one, right? Kind of the core blockchain is very much built for security, right? I don't think anyone would look at a blockchain that has 10-minute settlement times and they would say, like, obviously that is optimized for global adoption to be used as a medium of exchange. And so that's where the Bitcoin community is trying to build the scaling technologies of Lightning and you know, kind of all of that stuff. And, you know, I would argue that, like, so far it looks pretty good, but I do think that there's a lot of things that you know, still need to be built out. And also I think the critique being, okay, I theoretically understand what you're trying to do, but, like, prove it, show me the adoption. It's very similar to, like, a venture capitalist showing up to a company and saying, like, this is a beautiful deck, but, like, show me the users, show me the retention, show me the growth, right? And I think that's kind of like the market will ultimately be the referee a little bit in terms of how far along the, like, Bitcoin vision do we get. And obviously that's where markets get made, because the Bitcoin community is very, very, you know, optimistic and enthusiastic. And then I think that critics are saying, you know, I don't see a path from where we are today to that vision. And we'll kind of see what happens. The only thing I hope for is, you know, it happens in our lifetimes, right? Like, I want an answer before I die. It's like the way that I've now come to the conclusion. This isn't a 12-month exercise. It's probably a couple decades. And so, like, let's see where it kind of goes.